I'm Councillor Peter Wolf, Portfolio Holder for Adults and Housing Directorate at Dorset Council. As has already been said, the session is being recorded in order to provide an opportunity for others to watch it after this session. So may I ask you to remain on mute and use the chat bar as we talked about earlier. Can I give a particularly warm welcome to you for the keynote speaker session with our special guest speaker, Dame Phillipa Russell, who is Vice President of Carers UK and who is currently on the screen, who I've had a conversation with, and she is unbelievably interesting and passionate in the love of her subject. I'd like to share with you now an illustration that's been shared and constructed by artist Debbie de Mornay Penny, who is also a commissioning project officer for Somerset County Council. And Debbie drew it to celebrate Carers' Rights Day, raise awareness of carers, and to provoke a conversation. And I feel it pretty much perfectly sets the scene for the difficult and challenging life that carers have in juggling all of their responsibilities. And on balance, whilst we do have that challenge, and you can see putting slippers on, providing a Sudoku magazine, all sorts of things, and the pendant, etc. The fact is, caring can be extremely rewarding and provide real joy to the carers and the people being cared for. I'd also like now to introduce you to Phillipa, who was formerly the Director of the Council for Disabled Children and the first chair of the Prime Minister's Standing Commission on Carers. Phillipa is an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Healthcare and Child Health and of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and she works with a wide range of third sector organisations committed to improving the life of family carers. Phillipa has very personal experience. She cares for her son, Simon, who has learning disabilities and brain damage. And she also cared for her husband, who was diagnosed with cancer and the Lewy body dementia. And sadly, he passed away at the start of the pandemic. I can assure you that Phillipa has got lots and lots of lovely stories. You can put questions on the chat line, which we'll come to at the end. And I may have a couple of questions to add as well. But let's first of all listen and welcome Phillipa. Phillipa, it's lovely to see you, and I now hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me and for that warm introduction. And I am a carer, and I think that wonderful illustration which introduced this session really sort of expresses the lives that most of us have. I endeavour, like most carers, to try and maintain what seems to be a normal life and a nice home, but it isn't always like that. My son with brain damage and learning disabilities sometimes has some very interesting ideas about what lives where and what he wants to do on a particular day. And when I was caring for my husband with dementia, we had some very odd experiences indeed. And so just to start with chaos and hope that I move to something which is more positive, looking at the illustration that came first, I remember 2 years ago, just before my husband sadly died, that he was inspired to feel that he should be more useful around the house. And I was about to go on to a Zoom meeting. Yes, we had Zoom meetings, even at the very beginning of the pandemic. Everything was set up when suddenly there was the most almighty explosion. I thought the house had blown up. Well, the kitchen ceiling had certainly come down. Cautiously opening the door, I found that my husband had gone into the kitchen, decided in the way that sometimes people with dementia do, that he didn't want to eat the nice pie in the oven for his supper, and had taken 5 tins of salmon out of the cupboard. He rather liked tinned salmon. Some days he would eat nothing but salmon, put them in the oven and they'd exploded. And if you have ever seen a kitchen which is coated with salmon which has exploded, you will know what I mean, when the whole house not only smelt but was pink. And our Labrador dog, who was hoping for extras, came out of the kitchen. Somehow or another he wasn't hit by a flying tin. Also a nice shade of salmon pink. And at that point I thought, you cannot be a carer and do anything else, because I was distracted. But actually, of course, I was wrong. And I'm sure order was restored to the characters in this exhibition, this illustration, as soon as the artist moved her pen to the next drawing. So could we go back to my first slide for a moment, please? I'm not. And just a reminder here of how diverse we are as carers. I hasten to say all the photographs contain people who've given me permission to tell their stories and use their images. We've got Jeffrey and Sally. Jeffrey is a young man with cerebral palsy, has just moved into his own home, but as his mother says, I'm the backstop when the carers don't come, or somehow or another, a piece of digital equipment breaks down, and I'm there to see that he has a good life. In the background, we have Benji and Frida never expected that she would become a carer looking after her brother, who had brain damage after a road traffic accident. But her parents died very suddenly, and she found herself as a full-time carer, and it was tough. At the bottom, we have Lizzie and Carol has Rett syndrome, which is a progressive syndrome, very complex. Her mother has cancer. She survived very well on immune therapy, but as she says, I'm not cured. And my big concern for my daughter is what happens if I actually die before her, because at the end of the day, I'm her guardian angel. And then we have Priscilla, the aunt of one of my sons-in-law. She has just moved into a care home and has become a champion for people who, as she put it, have chosen to live in a large intentional rather than a biological family. And her campaign is to recognize that as we get older or disabled, we actually need a range of options. All too often, she says, I found that now I have moved into a care home, people think I'm not capable of making up my mind about anything, but I'm still me. Next slide, please. So the state of care, and this is just a quick reminder from Carers UK's annual State of Caring report. It's reckoned that there are now 13.6 million carers in the United Kingdom. That's 9.1 million new carers during the pandemic. And COVID-19 has, I think, as we all know, it is certainly true in the case of my son, who has lost so much from day services that couldn't open and support workers who couldn't come. The level of care provided by all of us as unpaid carers has risen. 81% of carers responding to the survey said they were providing more care than before the pandemic. Secondly, 78% of carers are caring for someone whose support needs have increased. That's certainly true of my son, who is in late middle age. He's done very well with his brain damage, to actually in hydrocephalus, to get as far as he can. But now he needs a great deal more support. And all of us who are carers are being asked to carry out a much wider range of nursing, healthcare, as well as care tasks at home. Then 6 out of 10 carers have felt lonely or socially isolated because of their caring responsibilities. Of course, we've had a digital rescue for a lot of us, but it hasn't worked for everyone. And 64% of carers in the survey, which was over 3,000 carers, said have significant depression or anxiety levels, and 65% feel their physical health deteriorated. But that's just actually a reminder at the end, new survivors and demographic change. The numbers of young adults with lifelong disabilities is expected to rise by 32% over the next 15 years. Local authorities, ADAS, tell us now that they are actually providing support for more people of working age than for older people. And it's a celebration. My son was expected to live till he was in his teens when he was born. Then it was thought maybe early middle age. Now the expectation is that he'll live to the average age of my people in my family. The average age of death in my family is 90. So Simon's likely actually to have a lot of living beyond me, which is why all of us who are unpaid carers need to be working with the paid carers, if you like, the local authorities, the NHS, the third sector, and working together to think what sort of long-term as well as short-term futures our relatives will have. Next slide, please. So 5 decades of caring, and I just wanted to put myself a bit into the picture. The building, which you will see to the side of this slide, is Harperbury Hospital. It's now shut. It's a long stay learning disability hospital. But when Simon, in the middle. He's in the middle with a volunteer at a play group, age 3. When Simon was born, my husband and I were diplomats. We were working in the Foreign Office and we were living in Central Africa. And we were offered, as a great treat when Simon's diagnosis was made, the chance for Simon to move into Harperbury Hospital. We were told that he was probably going to be severely disabled. Hydrocephalus was not well treated in those days. And the best thing was that we should hand him over to the nurses who would look after him. I'm afraid I took one look at Harperbury Hospital, well-meaning nurses, and I thought, not on your life. So we were determined that Simon would come home, which he did. It was a battle. The Foreign Office didn't want me to go back out to Malawi with him because they thought he would be an expense. There was huge discrimination against people with learning disabilities in those days. You could and you were turned away from hotels, from restaurants, and people didn't ask your child to birthday parties. I got over that by being the hostess with the mostest and running the most magnificent children's birthday parties. And my polite neighbours had to invite Simon back, common courtesy. And they realised what a lovely child he was. As one neighbour said wistfully, he was the only well-behaved little boy at my son's birthday party. And that was true. But then you see Simon now. He's middle-aged. He's got a garden and an allotment, which he absolutely loves. He doesn't allow me to eat those prize-winning leeks and vegetables, unfortunately. He doesn't like, and I have to sneak them out of the ground when he's not looking. He has a support worker and a volunteer. But it is still hard work because he is often not very well. He needs constant supervision because he might fall, and he is very, very vulnerable to people taking things off him in a shop, or not necessarily realizing, because his speech isn't clear, that he actually understands everything that's said. But he's having a good life, and that's really what we're talking about, I think, now. We've had the pandemic and it was hard, but I think it's important to remember how far we've actually moved if you look back to Harperbury Hospital. And I want to give that message of optimism. Next slide, please. So caring is for life, and I wanted to talk about a few families I know with permission. Malcolm and Barbara in the photograph. They're photographed walking along, photographed from the back. The photograph was taken by my autistic grandson, who at that time believed it was rude to photograph people from the front. We had a wonderful Christmas competition in the family in which Dylan's photographs of all these people taken from the back. We'd have to guess who they actually were. But Barbara and Malcolm are a remarkable couple and typical of many carers today. And as they said, Margaret said, caring is for life. It's a strenuous life, an unfinished journey, no cruises in the sunshine for me. And she became very, very involved in raising awareness of dementia, a great champion of people with dementia. Sadly, she died last year. But she said this particular event which I'm quoting from, we can't do it all. We need a reminder about the changing families, multiple carers, and shortfall in day services and carers breaks. And when you wonder why I'm saying multiple carers, Malcolm and Barbara provided a lot of mutual support. Malcolm developed dementia. Barbara had quite severe arthritis, but their biggest challenge was their lovely son, Robert, who had schizophrenia. And when Robert was well, he was very well. He got good jobs. He was a charming and delightful man. But when he stopped taking his medication, life could be very difficult. And Malcolm and Barbara realized what it could be like when you're supporting a son whose behavior, frankly, intimidates the neighbors. You have the broken windows, you may have to call the police, you have the terrifying mental health act, deprivation of liberties procedures to go through. But they managed. And Barbara always said, we need a family focus on assessment and care, because there's often more than one person that needs the care. Now, thinking of older people, because I've jumped from children to older people, 60% of older carers now provide more than 50 hours a week of complex care, and managing that web of care can be difficult. Can I just see the next slide, please? So this is a map, a web of care, which Barbara drew for an Alzheimer's Society event. And it's just a reminder of how much many carers are juggling in terms of their relative support. There are so many different elements, from keeping engaged with the community, dealing with the dietitian, dealing with the vexed issue of continence. If I had to pick one topic out that I have had endless conversations about with taxi drivers, and I seem to have had a lot of late taxi drivers in the last few years with my husband and with Simon, it is the whole vexed issue of continence. And actually not having the right continence or equipment matters hugely. It's not a thing we like to talk about, that it matters. And then, of course, there are all the other issues, actually dealing with the equipment, which sometimes goes wrong, dealing with the occupational therapist, the physiotherapist. One carer of a relative with dementia said to me the other day, I often feel that my life is like stamp collecting. I collect professionals and professional advice like other people collect stamps, but I wish there weren't so many of them sometimes. And then, of course, there's having care in your own home. And I think, however grateful everybody is for having care, there is an issue of intrusion, isn't there, in having carers? And I remember one mother with a very sick child who was able to bring her child out of hospital with oxygen tent, parenteral feeding, everything you could think of, to her own home. Great in some ways. And the NHS paid, in those happy days, this is 10 years ago, for somebody to actually be in the house at night so that the parents could sleep. But some mother said, would you actually want somebody you didn't know very well sitting on a chair outside your own bedroom every night? She said, I still woke when my daughter woke because I was worried. And then she said, you find yourself angry with the silly things, like somebody actually taking the last slice of bread to have a piece of toast. And of course, your poor carer wants a piece of toast in the morning. But then she said, so did we before we struggled to get the other children to school and go to work. So caring has to be about understanding that web of care and actually joining up the threads, but also sometimes finding simple solutions. Barbara was determined that her husband would stay at home. She spent a good deal of family money making the house as safe and accessible as possible. But suddenly, out of the blue, Malcolm's behaviour deteriorated. He was a big man. He became quite aggressive. And I'm very grateful for Margaret's story, because actually it gave an answer to my husband's behaviour years later. And one time she had to call the police because he was claiming that there was somebody in the house, an intruder, who was attacking him. And when Barbara went to help him, he hit her hard. She was in tears thinking what she could do. But luckily, there was a specialist Alzheimer's advisor in her area, an Admiral nurse. And he came and he assessed, he looked at every aspect of Barbara and Malcolm's life. And at the end, he said to her, I think the problem is your beautiful house. And she said, what do you mean? He said, you created a house with huge plate glass windows. You've got some beautiful antique furniture you moved into it with some lovely large curly mirrors. You created a place of light and space. But when Malcolm looks in the mirror or sees a reflection in the glass, because of his dementia, he thinks there is an intruder. He thinks there are multiple people in the room. He said, I'm very sorry, but I think you should take the mirrors down from the wall or cover them. And maybe, I know you don't like them, you should get some net curtains. And Barbara did. And sure enough, Malcolm's behavior modified. He had been genuinely frightened. She became genuinely frightened. And it could so easily have ended up with a hospital admission to some kind of ward for the elderly mentally infirm. But it was actually having somebody to hear the narrative, to hear Barbara's explanation, to see the house, to see Malcolm, to get a picture of what was really happening. And I think this is something that all of us who are carers need to be very cautious about. Nobody except us probably understands what our own narrative is, so we need to really share it. Next slide, please. So what are we looking for in the future? One of the lessons I've learned is the importance of collaborative care. It's a buzzword within the new Health and Care Bill, but it also implies a recognition that we carers are experts by experience. As with Barbara, that's not always clear exactly what the experience is telling us, but we have it, and we know our relatives and friends, and we know what they need. And as I showed in the web, carers are increasingly care coordinators for multiple services in and out of the NHS. But we need information to care well. And I worry, with the pressure that the NHS is under at the moment, that many of us who are carers are experiencing hospital discharges, even before the pandemic, when our relatives, for example, don't come out with the information that we need to be good carers at home. Good care is about a dialogue, and it's a challenge. And we know from Carers UK that contact with many GP practices, not their fault, but because of the lack of human contact, has been very difficult for carers. So we need to build on what works. And I think this comes back to a point I think I've already made, that we need to ask carers what actually went well. My son was admitted to hospital unexpectedly just at the end of the pandemic, not for anything COVID related. And I was frankly terrified of COVID, but terrified about what on earth the hospital would do with him if I wasn't there and everybody was wearing masks. Because he came in an ambulance, I was actually inserted myself alongside him into the hospital, and I was allowed to stay in a side room for 36 hours. The consultant said to me, well, actually, I think we might need you more than you need us. You can stay. Shrouded in plastic. But what I really learned there was how important, again, it was to actually have a carer there, because I could tell the health professionals things about Simon, which they couldn't possibly have known. I knew how to manage his discomfort, how to persuade him and comfort him. And I also could actually plan the discharge home. And somehow or another, now that hope we're moving out of the pandemic, we have to build up that care partnership back. I was very lucky when my son was young, because he has a shunt. He was in and out of neurosurgical wards endlessly, it seemed. But the relationship that we developed as a team with the health professionals made going home not seem terrifying. We didn't feel castaways on a desert island. But the pressures of recent years and the pandemic have put a lot of that at risk. Next slide, please. So looking to the future, we're going to see more intergenerational care. There are many more families now where there is an older person with dementia or needing care and support, and a younger one. And of course, we're also seeing more young carers and many younger people having to take on caring roles that perhaps they shouldn't in a family. But there are some interesting messages for the future. Somebody talked the other day at a conference about planning for digital futures. And there's no doubt that although many of us would like to go back to face-to-face contact for many activities, that being able to be online, like today, or in our own homes, has opened doors. Some people, like my son, benefited hugely from day services switching to online activities. Regrettably, my son absolutely hates anything on a screen and couldn't manage it himself, and it hasn't been a success. But I know for me, the world has kept open. Most of my family are actually in New Zealand, which is a very long way away, even with COVID. And without digital communication, I would have had no contact with them at all. But actually, digital means more than being able to switch on your laptop, your pad, or your phone. There have been huge developments, a lot of them pioneered in Japan, but now being developed here, to actually use modern technology to make houses safer and homes safer and more accessible. We're seeing the beginning of the piloting of robots. I mean, you may shrink in horror at the thought of robots, but they are being found to actually work very well with children and young people with autism who may get very worried, very upset. The robot can be something stable, soothing, predictable. but they're also working with a lot of older people. And in Japan, the number of robotic pets has in care homes has apparently reached several thousand. I wish I'd actually had a robotic dog or cat for my mother, because I think in the end of her life, it actually would have worked very well. But this is a picture in terms of housing options, future planning of Tom, who's the son of a friend of mine. Tom has learning disabilities, mild, but also a progressive physical disability. He did not want to live in a group home, a care home. It wasn't a success in supported living. He didn't want to stay at home with his mum and dad all the time, and they wanted him to establish himself on his own whilst they were there to support him. So he has moved into a house, which is what's commonly called a smart house. My son has a smart house as well. And a smart house is a house where all the technology that might help somebody being independent is used. So Tom, like my son, has sensors on his bed and his curtains. And if his curtains don't open at a certain time, and if the sensor on his bed doesn't show that he's got up, we might know that something wrong. There are sensitive alarm systems for fire, for water, for everything else you could think of that go through to a call center that monitors them. Downstairs, Simon has CCTV. It was interesting that when now every house, it seems, or many houses have Hive and all sorts of other means of making sure you haven't got an intruder when you're out. But in the days when Simon's house became a smart house, funded by an EU project to see if people with learning disabilities could live in that sort of house, and Thomas benefited from that research, it was thought to be sort of ethically wrong that we could be seen to be spying on Simon. And we had to have quite a debate. But actually, the CCTV, which can be switched on or off, is a great reassurance for Simon. He spends the nights on his own, though he's only at the bottom of the garden, around the corner. And he has support in the day. And he has special sensors again on the doors. When he goes out of the front door, there's a message which plays saying, "Have you got your keys, Simon?" before the door is shut. He's very good at locking himself out. And we went further and we thought, again, this is great potential for some people needing care and support. We were told, give him an Alexa for his birthday. Now, I'm afraid to say in the smart house, and I think a robot might be useful at some point, Alexa's has been our big failure because Simon embraced it with enthusiasm. We had difficulty teaching Alexa to understand Simon's voice. Because of his brain damage, his vocabulary is very good, but his spoken vocabulary is not always understandable. Simon got the message, but then he's in a little terraced house, and the neighbours both sides came and petitioned me and said, "We're terribly sorry. We do want Simon to be independent, but we really don't like loud brass band music early in the morning or late at night." And I said, what brass band music? Well, they said, "We know you've got him an Alexa, and we know Simon likes marching movement music. We think he's telling Alexa to play this music, and he's leaving it on downstairs when he goes upstairs, and our houses are shaking." Says something for modern building, doesn't it? So Alexa had to be modified. And we've explained to Simon that being a good neighbour means that you actually don't treat the neighbourhood to brass band music, even though it obviously has a place. But it's a reminder, you actually can't just throw a piece of equipment in and then hope it will work. But Tom is doing extremely well. He's got an Alexa and he's not playing brass band music. But the great thing is that because of a smart house, he has greatly reduced his need for care workers to go in, because the house is adapted to his needs. His needs are monitored and he feels safe. And his parents feel that they have some prospect of looking to a future where they are not constantly asking themselves what will happen when we're gone. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So how do we actually make it better? One of the big lessons, I think, in my lifetime has been that carers, exactly as today at the Dorset Carers Festival, need to get together. Somebody said to me at a Carers' Rights Day event, well, evening before the event last night, we actually need something like the Citizens' Assembly that informed the COP26 climate change event in Glasgow, that we actually need to get carers and those who support them and those they support together regularly to think, what would make a difference? What could our life be like? If you wonder what this photograph is, it was taken 2 years ago when we could have meetings like this at London Zoo, as you can see. And it brought together carers from around the country, including a number of young carers. It brought together representatives from local authorities and the NHS and the third sector to actually have a day together thinking about our futures and what would actually make a difference. None of us, of course, foresaw the pandemic coming. It was very interesting being in London Zoo. Unfortunately, this photograph, you can't see the kangaroos behind it, and the kangaroo enclosure at the back were actually listening avidly too. But I was one of the organisers of the event, working with NHS England, and I was amused when London Zoo rang me up and said, we actually want an extra for the event? And I said, well, what do you mean an extra? Because the zoo was being generous anyway, letting everybody go round freely, organising a special tea. It was a real set. A lot of the carers really hadn't been out much at all, and it was a huge treat for them. And they said, well, we actually have a meet and greet arrangement, and we can take an animal to meet a zoo resident, to meet your most important guest. But of course, you'll have to pay a bit extra. And I actually didn't think I could really ask the NHS or Carers UK to actually pay for an animal to meet and greet. But we did actually smile afterwards and think, what resident of London Zoo would we have actually chosen if we'd had a choice? And I can't believe there could have been many choices to go and shake the hands of Simon Stevens, who of course was Chief Executive of NHS England at the time, lovely man. But it amused me because, in a way, also being asked about that somehow gave the carers the proper status that they needed. And what were the conclusions of that assembly? A lot more work to do at local level. Firstly, that carers need early identification. So easily, they're not really recognised at the point they become a carer, and they need respect. And I think a lot of carers said, actually, we're really quite worried about being asked to do things now to provide a level of caring that was unthinkable 10 years ago. And we're not sure that we feel up to doing it safely. Because when you're a carer, you're also somebody else, aren't you? You're a friend, a son or daughter, a partner, a husband or wife, and you don't want to take that over. And when it comes to actually thinking about identification and what we're going to ask carers to do, we need to be very honest and very frank. And had to think the one thing that I didn't do when it was expected that I would, I refused, because actually I knew my husband wanted to refuse, was that I was told when he came home from hospital, one of his last visits back home, that I would be expected to do intermittent catheterization. And I knew my husband did not want me to do that. It was not something he thought a wife did to their husband. There's no reason why a wife shouldn't do it for a husband, hasten to say, but all of us have certain things we'd rather not, family members didn't do, to preserve our dignity. So I said no. I must admit I was very unpopular, but I stuck it out because I was doing a lot of other procedures, which were nursing procedures and quite complex. But I thought my husband, never mind myself, should have a right to say if there were certain things that needed doing, it shouldn't be me who was actually doing them. And I might say my social worker supported me. And actually, in the end, the catheterization was only needed for a few days anyway. But I think it's being open and honest about what we feel we can't do and what we need in order to do what needs doing. And this, of course, is where having a break, it's not up on the slide, but came in time and time again. Having the time to feel yourself. And also, I've met many people who needed care and support who said, I actually would quite also like a bit of time away from the person I love so much and cares for me. But Nobody wants to be together all the time. Secondly, there's the information advice. I've touched on that, whole family assessment support. Thirdly, managing transitions. Very few caring roles are static. Very often you're dealing with a situation with dementia, with some long-term condition, Parkinson's, for example, where you know that your relative or friend will deteriorate over time. We talk a lot about transition from child to adult services, but there are a lot of other transitions as adults begin to move into midlife and beyond. I can see that one day my son is going to be an older person, and I might be an older person as well, and his needs might be very different. But we need to begin those sort of honest future planning conversations, and they can be very difficult. And then there's thinking care in the community, because actually getting the housing adaptation you need, being able to access the leisure activity that matters, and transport matter as much as anything else. And in a rural area, transport or the lack of it can make or break. I have a sister-in-law in very rural Oxfordshire who's got multiple challenges at the moment. There is no public transport whatsoever in her village. There is a wonderful volunteer driving service, but actually it makes everything so much more complicated. And sometimes you don't feel you can ask again when maybe you've had 3 trips to the hospital in a week. And so so issues like transport, affordable transport, accessible transport really do matter. Next slide, please. So just a reminder of where we're going, because we have social care reform on the agenda. There have been some very heated and some very ill-tempered discussions in Parliament. We have a white paper coming out, that's to say the government's detailed plans for social care. We are told in early December, which is in a couple of weeks. But let's remember, whatever it actually proposes, we actually have a legal structure, which the Care Act 2014, which gives carers a right to a carer's assessment, which should embrace health and social care as appropriate. Now, ADAS, the Association of Adult Social Care, said the other day at an event, and it's perfectly understandable with COVID, that they probably have several thousand carers assessments, which ought to be made or redone. The point I've just made earlier, caring is about transitions, and the carers assessment may identify issues which are quite different to those of the cared for. Secondly, the Care Act really underlines the fact, gives legal status to carers having parity of esteem with the person they care for. Or do they? I think a lot of carers feel that they don't, and I think there are a lot of issues about how we support carers also to feel that they are competent and confident to actually sometimes challenge decisions and to be part of the care planning as well as the process. The Care Act says that carers should be asked if they are willing and able to carry out the care specified in their relative's care plan. If I was working for a hard-pressed local authority, I mean, I know that would probably terrify me, because we know resources are very scarce. But at least we can have the conversation, and we can look to the future. Very few carers would be angry, or they would certainly be less angry, if they were told, in all honesty, that resources are very tight, but we are going to do our best to actually address the issues that you raise, and are the different ways of doing things. And I think in a way that's been one of the pluses of the pandemic, that we have learned that we can do things in quite a lot of different ways. And I'm very struck by the way in which so many day services, when they've reopened, have reopened as part of community organisations, third-party organisations, rather than the more traditional centre-based local authority day services. And I think we've learnt that, again, that the use of new technology has actually enabled us to open a lot of doors to carers and those they support, which would otherwise have been impossible. But people matter, and we have to look after the so-called care market. Many unpaid carers need to share their care with care workers or paid carers, personal assistants and care homes, and we need to recognise our community of care. I need, and my son really needs, his support workers. I mean, it's not only because he needs people to help him survive, if you like, whether it's myself or somebody who's paid, but actually his support workers are his friends. They're the people that really make a difference in his life. The people that he meets at his day service, which is run by a third sector organisation. I mean, whether they're the organisers or the smaller number of people that are there now post-COVID, they're his community. And we talk about personalised care, but an important aim of personalised care is to enable people to be part of a community. Next slide, please. So I'm looking at my clock and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So if we look for the future and health and social care reform, parity of esteem for health and social care. I talked about parity of esteem. It's an odd phrase to many people between carers and the person they support. But I've lived in other countries, and I think the United Kingdom is, of all the countries that I've known or know something about, is the only country where, despite our commitment to integration, health and social care run on such separate lines. If I were back in the home that we had in Brussels, there would have been no argument about whether Simon's needs were health or social care. The system, which is a health insurance system, would automatically bring the two together. I'm not saying it would all be wonderful, but we wouldn't have these parallel streams that we have in this country. We've got new legislation coming through, we've got the Health and Care Bill, but I think it's still a big issue. Health and social care need each other, and we need them. Then there's the issue of paying for care. And I think already there are some angry comments flying around about the vexed business of whether your house should be used to pay for your care or not. I had to sell my house to pay for my husband's care. I've got another house, but the house I sold was the family home that I loved. It was 2 years ago tomorrow that I actually moved out, and I can't bear to walk down the road where it sat because I just actually felt the catastrophic care costs were not tenable, and there needed to be a fair system of co-production. We talk a lot about co-production, and families, mine and all of yours, we have to co-produce and we expect to contribute. But I never expected to have to shut the door on my family home in order to ensure my husband lived as good a life as he could and had as good a death as he can. I'm glad I did it, but I wish I didn't have to do it that way. And then paying for care charges. Local authorities, again, are very hard pressed, but charges are certainly discouraging some families from actually using services that they need. And I think all of us, as a nation, need that proper debate, because local authorities cannot avoid charging if they have not got the resources and the settlements that they actually need. Then thirdly, again, I think this will happen with the reforms. We have to invest in our workforce, our partners in care. Very sad that 2 of my husband's best carers left to go to work at the local Aldi's when it opened, because it paid so much more and it offered good working hours. And I said to them at the time, my husband, I knew then, wouldn't be living more than a few months. Look, I will make up the difference. I'll personally, somehow or another, pay you to remain working for this nursing home. We were sharing the care with the nursing home. And I remember Isolde saying to me, she said, look, I'm sorry, we have to go to Aldi. You can't go on paying for me when your husband's died. And I've got children and I need the money. And I thought there was such a huge debate between all of us, because they were lovely people who understood what care was, but they had to go, and I could see that the nursing home couldn't afford to pay them anymore. But that's part of putting a value on social care, isn't it? That health and social care staff should be valued, trained, and resourced as they deserve. And then, I'm sorry, there's a spelling mistake I've noticed. With demographic change, we need a long-term plan for social care. There can't be a quick fix. And that comes back to my meeting in London Zoo. I think all of us have got to get together and think what we really mean by social care and how we can actually change it. And the one thing I've learned in my life as a carer, it's 56 years as a carer last week, since my son was born, is that together we can actually solve a lot of the problems. and that the coming together is almost the most important thing that I've learned from a wonderful paediatrician who started me off on that line when Simon was first diagnosed. Next slide, please. And I'm just coming to the end, and I have come to the end. And my final reflection is my favourite quotation from Mayor Angelou. He said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And I think that's one of the crucial roles of health, social care, the carers organisations, carers themselves, actually feeling that you do matter, feeling that you are respected, that you have a relationship, are really the most important things. And what I don't and hope we don't see with the reforms which are coming up is ending up with battles on different sides, with unpleasant arguments and mudslinging, proverbial mudslinging, of course, I hope. Because at the end of the day, if we can develop mutual respect, mutual relationships, shared experiences, we can actually work together. And my very final comment, I've had the privilege of being involved, still involved, if only by Zoom, of course. I can't get out there now, with an EU-funded project in the Ukraine to bring together families of disabled children in that war-torn and very poor country to actually learn from the experiences in the UK of how they can build up solidarity with the professionals, with local and central government to improve the lives of their children. And it's been a very moving experience because it really has reinforced to me the importance of Mayor Angelou and the importance of having these local conversations, this local honesty about how you can change things. And things do change. I've got five decades of proof behind me. Even though life's hard now, it's far better than I could have anticipated when Simon was born. But thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. At least a festival is something to celebrate, and I think we all should be celebrating today.
Dame Phillipa, can I, on behalf of everybody, thank you hugely for your very, very inspirational and heartfelt words. That was just brilliant. We're going to start another session at past, so we've got very little time. I would make two comments. One is that we are hoping that the government will announce, I was at a conference earlier this week, the government will announce their care white paper details on December the 16th, but you won't make yourself that rich by betting on the government meeting their timescales, but I hope they do. Can I, in thanking you, because it was truly inspirational, can I recommend that all the people who are here who've listened access the recording, listen to it again, because there were so many good things, and perhaps get their colleagues and friends to listen to it again. Dame Phillipa, one final thank you. It was just brilliant. We are very, very grateful that you've come along, and I'm going to close the meeting now. But again, thank you. You were brilliant. Thank you very much, Phillipa.
Thank you, and sorry for going on for too long. As you see, it's an exciting journey.
It is, and we don't mind at all, because it was absolutely fabulous. So I'm gonna leave the meeting, and I ask other people to do so, because we'll need to keep the lines over. And whoever's put the applause hands, Amanda Dunning, thank you. Absolutely right. We're so grateful. You've given us a really inspirational talk. Thank you very much indeed.